You know, sometimes we just have to slow down, back up, focus on something that was done or said, perhaps over the weekend, perhaps last week, and challenge it. And I want to start the program that way. Joy Reid has free rein to say some of the most disgusting, outrageous, racist, bigoted things. Because the media today do not monitor themselves. It's really quite incredible. She's America's bigot. She's America's racist, as far as I'm concerned. Now, she was on with Salon last week, which is a radical left Marxist operation in and of itself. And she said something that I want to address for once. Somebody has to address it. It'll be me. Cut 17, go.
And to find out that literally Barack Obama's 2 terms as president are your reparations, and Juneteenth, which you already celebrated anyway, is your reparations, and yet you built this country. You literally physically built this country, and yet the attitude toward you from a lot of your peers and your fellow citizens is just shut up and be grateful. And it's infuriating.
Okay. Nobody's telling black people or anybody else shut up and be grateful. I do think all American citizens of all stripes should be grateful. But it's the left that tells everybody to shut up. On college campuses, in the media, and elsewhere. But I want to get this history straight about who built America. And this is why I tell you to read The Democrat Party Hates America. I anticipated every single one of their arguments in the lead up to this election. Every one of them. But we have, in any given week, 14, 15 million listeners, and that doesn't even include the podcast and all the rest, and about 400 to 500,000 people who've purchased this book in one form or another, so I want to inform as many people as I can. Did capitalism, number one, promote slavery? You hear this all the time, too. And was America built on the exploitation of slaves? Because that's what Joy Reid is saying. Now, this is a frequently repeated narrative of modern-day Marxists. First, of course, slavery is an undeniable fact of American history. But so are the numerous efforts to abolish it. Every northern state passed laws to abolish slavery in the first 2 decades after the Revolutionary War, either immediately or soon thereafter. In 1800, Congress passed the act prohibiting the importation of slaves, which took effect in 1808. Of course, slavery in parts of the United States persisted. And by the time of the Civil War, the overwhelming number of slaves were held in the agrarian South. But most white Southern families did not have slaves. They were too poor to own slaves. Less than 25% of the South was wealthy enough to own slaves. Second, the North did not rely on slavery to build its industrial capacity. The North. Indeed, while factories were built all over the North and South, the vast majority of industrial manufacturing was taking place in the North. The South had almost 25% of the country's free population, but only 10% of the country's capital in 1860. 90% of the country's capital was in the North. The North had 5 times the number of factories as the South, and over 10 times the number of factory workers. In addition, 90% of the nation's skilled workers were in the North. So how could the slaves in the South, when the vast majority of families in the South didn't have slaves, but for the wealthy families, have built the entire country? So by 1860, the North had over 110,000 manufacturing establishments. The South had just 18,000. The North produced 94% of the country's iron, 97% of its coal, and not incidentally, 97% of the country's firearms, all produced in the North. It contained 22,000 miles of railroad to the South's 8,500. The North outperformed the South agriculturally as well. Northerners held 75% of the country's farm acreage, produced 60% of its livestock, 67% of its corn, 81% of its wheat. All in all, they held 75% of the nation's total wealth in the North. So I point out the lesson is the exact opposite of what the American Marxists and Democrat Party preach. That is, capitalism and a free people create wealth, prosperity, opportunity, and yes, colorblindness. Indeed, Nobel Prize laureate and economist, the late Milton Friedman, profoundly declared, the great virtue of a free market system is that it does not care what color people are. It does not care what the religion is. It only cares whether they can produce something you want to buy. It is the most effective system we have discovered to enable people who hate one another to deal with one another and help one another. I've often given the example, it's in Liberty and Tyranny. If you go to a restaurant for eggs, a diner or something like that, no matter where you are in the country, you get some eggs, you get some potatoes, some toast, some bacon, whatever. You don't have the foggiest idea who produced it, let alone what the race is and the religion is, and you don't give a damn. You could care less. That's Milton Friedman's point. Obviously, slavery is unacceptable. It's unconscionable. There's no excusing it. But capitalism didn't drive slavery. Slavery has existed and exists today throughout the world and in non-capitalist societies. As Peter W. Wood, president of the National Association of Scholars, explains, slavery was not an American invention or a European one. It has existed in human societies for thousands of years. In North and East Africa, slave capture and trading were pursued on an enormous scale by Arabs. When Europeans encountered native kingdoms on Africa's Atlantic coast in the 15th century, they discovered slavery as a deeply embedded practice. That the Portuguese and the Spanish fostered this practice by creating a market for African slaves in the New World is among the great tragedies of human history. Other European powers eventually joined in perpetuating that tragedy. Perhaps someone should inform Hannah Jones, that is, Nicole Hannah Jones, and other American Marxists that the greatest slave states that exist today do so under the banner of Marxism. And what of post-Civil War America? Again, the accusation is that capitalism and American economic growth had been nurtured by racial discrimination and racial inequality. That is, capitalism intersected, quote unquote, with slavery and racism. I call this, by the way, civil rights Marxism, a term that I've coined. It is argued that racial capitalism is based on the theft, exclusion, and exploitation of people of color for the economic benefit of white people. In short, white supremacy is what undergirds America's economic system and its history. Let's see, I skip ahead here. And then they lie about why they think that's the case. And that, of course, is part of the problem. The lesson is the exact opposite. Bear with me. Looking for a place marked, and I have one eye closed. Here we are. Coleman Hughes, great guy, caught Ibrahim Kendi, Mr. CRT, in several questionable assertions and even big whoppers when Kendi made similar claims about white privilege and capitalism. Hughes explained as follows. Kendi correctly notes that blacks are more likely than whites to die of prostate cancer and breast cancer, but does not include the fact that blacks are less likely than whites to die of esophageal cancer, lung cancer, skin cancer, and ovarian cancer, bladder cancer, brain cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and leukemia. Of course, it should not be a competition over which race is more likely to die of which disease, but that's precisely the point. By selectively citing data that shows blacks suffering more than whites, Kendi turns what should be a unifying race-neutral battleground, namely humanity's fight against deadly diseases, into yet another proxy battle in his war about racism. Hughes further notes that when Kennedy asserts that, quote, black unemployment rate has been at least twice as high as the white unemployment rate for the last 50 years because of the conjoined twins of racism and capitalism, why limit the analysis to the past 50 years? Hughes cites a Pew Research article that shows the black-white unemployment gap was small or non-existent before 1940, when America was arguably more capitalist and certainly more racist. Moreover, Alan Barub of the liberal Brookings Institute examined recent census information and found that although there is an income gap between whites and blacks, he writes, from 2013 to 2018, most major metropolitan areas registered estimated increases in black and median house income that exceeded those for white households. As an example, in Phoenix, the typical black household's income rose 29%, from just under $40,000 to more than $51,000 a year, compared to 12% increase for the typical white household family, from $63,000 to $71,000. Across the 20 metropolitan areas with the largest black populations, where sample sizes are larger, 15 registered a larger estimated rise in median black income than median white income. So he says there's a gap, but black income is growing significantly faster than white income. Now, why am I doing this? To push against civil rights Marxism and the Joy Reids of the world, because if I don't do this, it's not going to get done anywhere. And there's more. Although the Bureau of the Census on household income, that is, household income inequality, showed that in 2017, the bottom 20% of households had an average income of $13,258. Other data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that these same households spent $26,000, twice as much as they had, on consumption, 2 times more than their income. Households in the second 20% income group spent 11% more than their census income. The census also reports that the top 20% of households had average income of $220,000, but spent $116,000. So what is this? Welfare. Food stamps, subsidies of all kinds, and not just for minorities, for all people in that income. So income in itself, is his point, doesn't explain what's taking place in society. Income by itself does not explain what's taking place in society when you have this massive, massive redistribution of wealth taking place. He says, looked another way, a comprehensive study conducted by Just Facts concluded that after accounting for all income, I got it, all income, charity, and non-cash welfare benefits like subsidized housing and food stamps, the poorest 20% of Americans consume more goods and services than the national averages for all poor people in the most affluent countries.